On November 4th, 2008, Barack Obama was elected president. People danced in the streets and prepared for change. But on that same day, the Bush administration, with only 3.5 months left in office, slapped together a last-minute gift for the oil and gas interests. The Bush administration planned to auction off federally owned oil-rich land in southern Utah to exclusive oil interests.
Hey, we're auctioning off some land in southern Utah. Beneath that desert is a gold mine. Well, of course those tree huggers and monkey ranchers will complain, and the hippies will write letters, but I can guarantee you the whole deal will be sealed before Mr. Yes We Can plants his socialist ass in the Oval Office. Be in Salt Lake, December 19th. Excellent.
Yippee! I knew you boys would come through.
It's about time. Thanks a million. Drill, baby, drill.
When the Bureau of Land Management wishes to conduct an auction of public land for oil and gas extraction, they are required to issue an environmental impact statement 3 months before the auction takes place. The BLM, in this case, issued a rushed environmental impact statement only a month and a half before the auction that understated and in some places completely ignored the detrimental effects the drilling would have on our air, water, fish, plant life, and archaeological sites. Nor did they consider the thousands of people whose economic livelihoods depend on visitors to this area. Not once was global climate change mentioned in the report. And so, the monkey wrenchers, tree huggers, and hippies did whine. So did the desert rompers and the climate change shriekers and the unwashed lefties and the pinkos of the forest. 1,600 letters of protest were sent to the BLM and countless petitions. On December 17th, the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance filed a federal lawsuit seeking to prevent the auction. The Bureau of Land Management received complaints from other federal agencies as well. The Environmental Protection Agency and the National Park Service advised them against going through with the auctions. But the BLM decided to ignore public outcry and proceed with the auction. But little did they know, their plans would be thoroughly derailed by a student in a red parka. On the morning of December 19th, 2008, Tim DeChristopher, a graduate student of economics at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, took a test that asked the question, if the oil and gas companies are the only ones that bid on public lands, are the true costs of gas and oil exploitation reflected in the prices paid? Tim was inspired. He finished his test and set off to protest the auctions.
Save our land! 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 Save our land!
Let's get in there.
Save our land!
They'll throw us out!
Then let's get thrown out!
Save our land! 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 Save our land!
DeChristopher had successfully disrupted the auction by buying up $1.7 million worth of land. And thus began the canonization of DeChristopher as a modern-day folk hero. He took his place nestled between Johnny Appleseed and Edward Abbey. DeChristopher's actions were sufficiently subversive and anti-authoritarian enough to get the radical fringes of the environmental movement to rally around him. But he had not chained himself to anything, and there were no flames involved or explosions. And yet, Tim DeChristopher had not deviated far from the old-school non-violent direct action techniques. So the established environmental movement praised him just as strongly as their more radical counterparts. Within days, Salt Lake City lawyers Patrick Shea and Ronald Yengich had volunteered their legal services. Through the website bitter70.org, enough money was raised for Tim to make the first payment on the parcels of land he had won at the auction. On January 19, 2009, the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance won their lawsuit, and Obama-appointed Secretary of the Interior Kenneth Salazar canceled all of the leases. But DeChristopher was not pardoned. No harm, no foul, wrong. On April 1st, 2009, Tim DeChristopher was indicted on 2 counts. First, violating the Federal Onshore Oil and Gas Leasing Reform Act, and secondly, for providing a false statement. DeChristopher's lawyers plan to use the necessity defense, which is used to defend one who has broken the law in defense of a greater good. If one is to use the necessity defense, they must meet 4 hurdles. First, it must be proven that the defendant was faced with a choice of evils and chose the lesser evil. Second, he must prove that he acted to prevent imminent harm. Third, he reasonably anticipated a direct causal relationship between his conduct and the harm to be averted. And fourth, he had no legal alternatives to violating the law. But DeChristopher's case was being heard by one D. Benson, a George H. Bush-appointed federal judge who was famous for standing up for the powerful. In a previous case, Judge Benson had ruled that Ken Salazar had acted outside of his jurisdiction when he canceled the leases. Benson barred DeChristopher from using the necessity defense because, as he wrote in his opinion, there was not sufficient proof for the existence of climate change for DeChristopher to meet the 4 hurdles of the necessity defense. According to Benson, climate change does not present imminent harm. Not only did Benson bar DeChristopher from using the necessity defense, he banned DeChristopher's defense from naming Tim's motivations for disrupting the auction. He also banned the DeChristopher defense from saying that the amount Tim owed for the land he bought had been raised in time for the first payment to be made. In a case where the plaintiff is representing the United States of America, and the judge is also representing the United States of America, it is important for the jury to have as much information as possible. Judge Benson put a severe pair of blinders on his jury, making it nearly impossible for them to rule in favor of DeChristopher. To the jury, DeChristopher would appear to be a crazed troublemaker who wandered in off the street and disrupted a federal proceeding. His fate was sealed. Writer and activist Naomi Klein, wildlife author and conservationalist Terry Tempest Williams, and Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org, wrote a letter in support of Tim DeChristopher. Dear friends, the epic fight to ward off global warming and transform the energy system that is at the core of our planet's economy takes many forms. Huge global days of action, giant international conferences like the one that just failed in Copenhagen, small gestures in the homes of countless people. But there are a few single moments, and one comes next month, when the federal government puts Tim DeChristopher on trial in Salt Lake City. Tim, Bitter 70, pulled off one of the most creative protests against our runaway energy policy in years. He bid for the oil and gas leases on several parcels of federal land, even though he had no money to pay them, thus unpending the auction. The government calls that violating the Federal Onshore Oil and Gas Leasing Reform Act and thinks he should spend 10 years in jail for the crime. We call it a noble act, a profound gesture made on behalf of all of us and on the future. Tim's action drew national attention to the fact that the Bush administration spent its dying days in office handing out last rounds of favors to the oil and gas industry. After investigating irregularities in the auction, the Obama administration took many of the leases off the table. With the Interior Secretary Ken Salazar criticizing the process as a headlong rush, and yet that same administration is choosing to prosecute the young man who blew the whistle on this corrupt process. We cannot let this stand. When Tim disrupted the auction, he did so in the fine tradition of nonviolent civil disobedience that changed so many unjust laws in this country's past. Tim's upcoming trial is an occasion to raise the alarm once more about the peril our planet faces. The situation is still fluid. The trial date has just been set, and local supporters are making plans for how to mark the 3-day proceedings. But they are asking people around the country to flood into Salt Lake City in mid-March. If you come, there will be ample opportunity for both legal protest and civil disobedience. For example, outside the courthouse there will be a mock trial with experts like NASA's Jim Hansen providing facts that should be heard in the inside chambers. We don't want Tim on trial. We want global warming on the stand. Demonstrators will be using the time-honored tactics of civil disobedience to make their voices heard outside the courthouse in an effort to prevent business as usual. It's business as usual that's wrecking the earth. There will be an evening of concerts, there will be gatherings, a mini-summit to share ideas on how the climate movement should proceed in the years ahead. This is a people's movement that draws power from around the globe. For a few days, its headquarters will be Salt Lake City.
DeChristopher was convicted of 2 felonies and faces up to 10 years in prison and $750,000 in fines. But he began a new type of environmental action, one that might be our only hope.